Hello. Okay, Heretic, a horror thriller directed and written by Scott Beck and Bryan Woods. I know them from being the writers of A Quiet Place, a movie that I absolutely adored. And they also directed, it came out last year, the movie 65 with Adam Driver. And it was a movie that I was really looking forward to. It has a very interesting premise, but it was massively disappointing. But here they return with this religious horror thriller starring Hugh Grant, and I've been looking forward to it. I've liked what I've been seeing when it comes to the trailers for this movie, and it just has a very interesting premise. So the movie follows two Mormon missionaries who attempt to convert a reclusive Englishman, only to realise he is more dangerous than he seems. So I loved how the first two acts of this movie were constructed. It's aided by a very smart screenplay that in turn fuels this creeping sensation of mounting dread throughout those first two acts, and I was just completely riveted. And it's all down to that very smart screenplay and the brilliant performance by Hugh Grant as this Mr. Reed. The screenplay does a very clever job at keeping me anyway compelled and riveted by the series of events that unfolded involving our characters. For example, I felt the first hour of this movie was mainly just Hugh Grant's character, Mr. Reed, discussing with these two missionaries the origins of Monopoly and how they evolved over time, or just different iterations of songs, and how these moments are written, along with Hugh Grant's captivating performance, just helped elevate the horror and dread, allowing these moments to just swallow you up. I was constantly engaged within the conversation, and it's because of how these moments are written, along with that fantastic performance by Hugh Grant, that just made this entire experience riveting and compelling. Like, I was so immersed and engrossed with what it was that was happening. And if you take that step back and just kind of look at what those first two acts are, and even while I was watching it, I was sort of just amazed by what they were achieving through the screenplay. And for me personally, I think the reason why those first two acts are so effective is because of how clever they were with the writing and how they wrote the character of Mr. Reed. But then it's also then elevated even more by that fantastic, beautiful performance by Hugh Grant and just what he brings to the character in regards to that kind of quirkiness. There's this sort of almost kind of like a whimsical humour to the character as well, and sort of certain little things he would do with his expressions. And I just found myself sort of completely captivated by what Hugh Grant was sort of bringing to life on the screen, but that it was also aided by that very smart screenplay where really when you look at it, it could have easily have just been a very dull experience, but it was effective due to how it was written. And then, you know, along with that kind of sort of dark, whimsical sort of humour that's buried within it, which is sort of brought to life with the character of Mr. Reed, it's sort of, at the same time, they're sort of playing with your emotions, because you've got this sort of creeping sense of dread that's just growing and growing. But then you've got this sort of charm to the character of Mr. Reed that Hugh Grant just brings to life, you know, naturally really and just beautifully. And what that charm of the character does, along with that kind of quirkiness, is somewhat put you at ease a little bit. But then they just throw you into the horror again as the character of Mr. Reed takes another turn and as the character evolves through the story. I just thought, yeah, this was the way in which this movie was written and sort of the setting in which it's based and just what it was that they were attempting to explore with this story, you know, with the fact that you got this character of Mr. Reed testing these two girls' faith and sort of their belief, and how they go about that was incredibly effective, and I was riveted by how mainly within those first 2 acts, sort of how it played out and how they were constructed. And yeah, the story of Heretic is one that challenges one's faith and belief, and I just found this premise to be so riveting and compelling due to how it was written and crafted. The way they just incorporated this into a horror story was beautifully done, and it's one that will definitely start conversations and discussions long after the credits have rolled. It did with me, as it explores themes that have always intrigued me. The movie challenges you in a way that isn't preachy or heavy-handed, and I felt it was quite smart in how it approaches these questions with the character of Mr. Reed. Heretic for me was a very layered experience. It's one of those movies where you can sort of dig as deep as you want to in regards to what the film is exploring with its themes around religion, and I think the film does it in a very clever way. And it's up to you to sort of really kind of dissect and sort of interpret sort of what it is you feel the movie's exploring, whether it be visually or what it is that, you know, the character is saying and doing. And that's another aspect of this movie that I really like. I think it does a really smart job at challenging 2 different views on religion. So no matter where you stand on religion and how you look or feel or believe on religion, I feel like it challenges those different views in a way that's very smart. And depending on what your view is on religion, that's where I feel the horror will be heightened even more. I think it's going to be a very different experience for different people depending on what your depending on what your worldview is when it comes to religion. And just staying on the subject of this movie being a layered experience, there's a moment or aspect of its story that I really want to talk about, but this is a spoiler-free review, so I'm going to try and be as vague as possible. But it's in the an aspect of what it is that I'm going to sort of mention you is in the trailers. And it's this model house that Mr. Reed is creating or crafting. And it plays a small part within its story. And within the 3rd act, it sort of comes to life in a way from a sort of a visual storytelling perspective that I kind of liked. But it was speaking to me in a way that I deciphered this moment as being sort of the writers exploring that idea or theory behind our existence. And I'm trying to be as vague as possible because I want this to be spoiler free. But depending on what your theories are behind the reason of why we are here, and sort of the reasons behind our existence, I felt like this little mechanism within the story of there being this model, a house, and how it sort of comes to life within a visual storytelling perspective within the 3rd act, kind of really spoke to me in a way that I felt like that's what they would sort of trying to sort of explore you or sort of say to you, the viewer. But at the same time, I felt like it was also up to you and how you deciphered that moment as well. And I hope I've been as vague as I can there. And I'm just really curious if you guys, obviously, if you've watched the movie, what did you think? And so do you think there was a much deeper, bigger meaning, a much larger meaning behind that mechanism or that aspect within the story of this model house and how it plays a part in the story? Let me know below in the comments. Or maybe it's just me and I'm perhaps looking too much into it. I do feel the horror within the 3rd act slightly derails or falters as you come to the movie's sort of conclusion and, you know, the revelations within that 3rd act. I felt like for me, sort of that creeping, that tension that is built up beautifully through that first 2 acts does somewhat falter as we start to sort of get what it is that, you know, what the motivations are behind the character of Mr. Reed. But I was still completely 100% engaged and riveted and compelled by what was going on because of how committed and involved I felt I was with these characters' stories and journey, and just how the film swallows you up into those first 2 acts. You've also got great performances from both Sophie Thatcher as Sister Barnes and Chloe East as Sister Paxton. They felt like real people The performances felt very natural, which allowed to sell the horror that these characters find themselves within. I believed in their conviction. I cared for these characters. That's what allowed me to remain engaged throughout this experience. Even if that third act does somewhat lose some of the momentum, tension and horror due to sort of how the revelations come to light. Big part of why I remained engaged, not was because of what I've already mentioned in regard to the writing and Hugh Grant and just how this movie is constructed, but it's also these two performances from these two actresses and just how they bring their characters to life. Like, I felt like I knew so much about them, and it's how these two girls, these two missionaries, sort of their characters, sort of where these characters come from in regards to faith and sort of how they came into faith and religion. So you've got the one character that found religion and you've got the other one then that was born into religion, and just how that plays a part into the story and how the story evolves right up to his conclusion was very smart. And it just goes back to sort of how smart the screenplay was, how clever it actually was. It's also elevated by Sophie Thatcher's and Chloe East's performance as these characters. And to just touch on the visual aspect of this movie, there is so much being said, as I've already touched on, when it comes from a sort of a visual perspective. And there was some really nice imagery throughout the movie, beautifully visualizing the themes that they're exploring around religion. For example, there's a moment with a snowstorm and you've got this sort of simple shot or frame where you see this sunlight shining towards the front of the house, and it's beautifully shot in a way that's saying so much from a religious perspective. And there's also moments in how Mr. Reed would be framed within the lens, elevating the tension and the devilish aspect of the character, which I know I've said this already, but just Hugh Grant brings this aspect of the character to life beautifully, but it's also aided through how the camera would be used. And ultimately, Heretic is really about the power of faith and how powerful faith is. And I feel like how the movie explores that is done in a very effective way that evokes all the right emotions. And again, going back to wherever it is you sit and within religion, whether you're a believer or not, I think it's going to still evoke those right emotions from you no matter where you sit, and challenge you in a way that, you know, is very thought-provoking and gets discussions started, and that's what I like about movies like this. So yeah, they are my thoughts on Heretic. I highly recommend it, and I would be giving Heretic an 8 out of 10. So yeah, what did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Do you agree or disagree with anything I've said? Then please let me know in the comments below and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, then thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to watch future movie reviews from just some random Welsh geek rambling on, then please hit the subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot to me. And I just want to say a big thank you to all of those that are interacting with the channel, whether it be liking, disliking, commenting and subscribing. It means an awful lot. I will always be overwhelmed by how many of you do want to follow just some random Welsh geek rambling on about film and TV, but it does mean an awful lot. I'm hoping to hit 500 by the end of the year, 500 subscribers. It's a little goal that I've set myself, but yeah, a big thank you to all of those that have already subscribed. It means an awful lot. And I got many more reviews planned. I'm a little bit behind over the last week, but I am trying my best to catch up, and I'm looking forward to sharing more future releases with you all. Gladiator 2 releases next weekend. Really looking forward to checking that out. A sequel that I actually personally don't feel like we needed. So hopefully Ridley Scott gives us something that actually feels like it should exist. So yeah, thanks again for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll be catching you guys soon.